About a year ago, I posted a video about the first season of 86, and although I did have issues with it, I still spoke pretty positively about it. I also mentioned I wanted to do a follow-up video on the show, something that I completely forgot about and only crossed my mind recently. But I found that after thinking on this show for a while, I feel very differently about it now than when I made that video, and wanted to do something a bit different from what I was planning. And that's why I'm going to be discussing my revised thoughts on 86, talking about which of my opinions changed, which stayed the same, and what caused me to feel so differently about this show. One thing I still can't complain about with 86 is just how well made it is. Not only does it look amazing, but there's plenty of visual parallels and other details I have to pay close attention to notice. You can tell that the people who worked on this show did care about what they were making, and I can't help but appreciate that. It also has a great soundtrack, being composed by two of my favorite composers, Hiroyuki Sawano and Kota Yamamoto, who, if you don't know, also worked on Attack on Titan. Clearly a lot of effort went into this show, and I just wish that effort was used for better material. One thing that I've been more conscious about recently when it comes to watching shows or movies is recency bias. I find that there's some things I watch that I like at the time, but the more I think about them, the less positively I feel. And I do think that's what I was affected by when I made that first 86 video. Even if I don't dislike the show, I feel recency bias led to me overlooking a lot of issues that I now have trouble ignoring. For years now, I've been very interested in stories that tackle themes of war, whether it's a fantasy series like Attack on Titan, or a more realistic story like Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. I find it really interesting to see how war can be used to explore human nature, so I was really curious to see how 86 handles these themes. And to be fair, it does have elements of a compelling war story that I mentioned in my last video. But in retrospect, I felt it lacked any real emotion to actually make something impactful. 86 is trying to depict war in a gritty way, but it kind of sugarcoats its themes with how it balances violent conflict with more slice-of-life moments. I don't have a problem with balancing tones, but the way 86 does it makes the themes much harder to take seriously. It also has a similar issue to the first season of Attack on Titan, where even though a lot of characters die unceremoniously, these deaths kind of fall flat when everyone who dies is so underdeveloped. This also leads to another issue, as especially in the second core of 86, there's a real lack of tension since you get the feeling that no one of importance is actually going to die. It's just that when the 86 are constantly in battle, it feels like there should be a greater sense of danger than there actually is. My thoughts on how the show handles racism and oppression are pretty much the same. It's constantly hammering down how bad these things are without actually saying much about them. It's not only a very patronizing way to depict these themes, but it leaves very little room for them to actually be explored. I'm not saying that you can't tackle these kinds of themes. I could think of plenty of stories I like that very blatantly explore them, but they need to be depicted in a way that's believable and makes some kind of actual point about the topic. 86 could have been far more interesting if we saw examples of racism being ingrained into San Magnolia in more subtle ways. This issue isn't helped by the fact that the show spends so little time fleshing out San Magnolia. I genuinely struggle to remember learning anything about it besides widespread ignorance and them using a lot of artificial ingredients for food. So when this underdeveloped location is combined with badly handled themes, it just makes for a setting that doesn't feel realistic in any way. I only read a couple chapters of the light novel, but from what I can tell, San Magnolia is explored in a bit more detail. It isn't amazing world building or anything, but I felt like I learned a lot more about the world than I ever would have learned from watching the anime. Maybe I might have missed some things from the show, but if I don't have a basic understanding of the world after having seen it, then I think that's a big problem in of itself. I mentioned in my last video how I didn't feel attached to most of the characters, and I feel that way even more now than I did before. They are characters which you can more or less figure out their personality just by looking at their design if you have any knowledge of anime tropes. Playing into tropes isn't inherently a bad thing, but it is when that's most of the depth any of these characters get. I genuinely struggle to recall anything about these characters besides individual details like a hobby or fear they have. They're extremely underwritten and extremely hard to care about when any of them die. Even Shin and Lena, who are two of the only characters to actually get some development, strongly adhere to anime tropes. Even their developments just aren't that interesting. It feels like the bare minimum of character growth rather than something that's actually interesting. Even when I think back to scenes that are trying to be emotional or show the culmination of their developments, in retrospect they feel a bit emotionally manipulative to me. When I think of the most impactful moments of my favorite stories, they not only work because of great visuals and music, but because of how invested I feel in the characters. But with 86, when I think back to what made certain scenes impactful for me, all I can think of is the visuals and music. Rather than properly getting me invested in the characters, it feels more like having something vaguely sad happening on screen, and playing the sad music at the right time to force some emotional response out of the viewer. Even episode 22, which despite being an incredibly scored and directed episode, in retrospect just feels a bit like Crybait to me. Very well made, but still manipulative. While I don't dislike 86, I can't help but feel disappointed when thinking about what it could have been. There's elements of the type of stories I love in 86, but I never felt it took advantage of them to make for a genuinely good show. I have yet to read the light novels past the anime, so maybe the story is going to get really good and I just don't know it yet. But I do feel the anime so far has been very underwhelming. It is by all means a fine show, but when I see people holding it up as a modern masterpiece, I just wish I could understand where they're coming from. I'll probably read some of the light novels since it's still at its worst entertaining, but its issues make me less than hopeful to see where it goes. But however you felt about the video or the show, please let me know. The last thing I want to do is annoy anyone. I just want to give my thoughts and I'm hoping I'll hear some of yours. Anyways, that's about it. Thanks for watching.